Hi everyone, welcome. I'm out here in my garden and I've got my outdoor worm bag over here. It's a system that I usually keep outdoors, but during the winter things got really cold out here in my yard. And there was one point in time when we came out here to check on this thing and we couldn't even really breach the surface of the material. We had to use a metal spike to poke our way through the frozen outer layer just to get into a non-frozen piece of the center of it where there were luckily a big bunch of worms huddled together trying to stay warm. So I chickened out. It sort of became an indoor worm bag for a little while, but now that it's warm again, I've returned it to outside. It's been 12 days now since it's been outside, and it was at that time we decided we might start gearing this thing up for migrating the worms out, getting them situated in a new home, and seeing what we could do about harvesting the castings in here. So what we did was we took some food and we just kind of dropped it into the middle of the container to see what kind of a turnout we get, And I'm not really prepared to move the worms out. I just thought that if the food supply in the feeding zone was dwindling, we might be able to replenish it today and just let the process continue. So I was just going to excavate, inspect, and possibly replenish the food as needed. This is actually the peel of a kiwi. The kiwi was in here for months and months and months. And it never even showed any signs of breakdown because the worms never made their way through the skin of the kiwi. But once the skin got breached and the worms could get in, it was pretty much lights out for the kiwi. Until the outer skin got breached, the worms were just unable to get into it, take advantage of it. I gotta tell you, this material is really, really nice. Tons and tons of castings, but also, tons of little bits of debris scattered throughout the material. And I guess that's the reason we've been talking about coming out here with my screen and trying to screen this material down so that we can not have to wait for 3 years or 5 years or however long it's going to take for peanut shells to break down. Usually when I'm trying to migrate worms out of the material that they're inhabiting, I usually try to, lure them into one or the other end of the bin. So for me to try to lure them to the center is a little bit out of sorts for me. It's not usually the method that I follow. It wasn't so much trying to keep to my old pattern. It just seemed like the most sensible method to use here, since who knows where the worms are, and centralizing the material that you want them to be drawn to into the middle seems like the best way to maximize the draw. So what we did was we threw a box in here. I didn't just throw food in to try to get them to come to the middle. I actually placed that food into a box so that the idea would be that perhaps at some point later in the game we could just remove the entire box rather than removing a whole bunch of castings going along with it that's right around it. I guess since the box is where the food was, it's not too surprising to find worms all around the outer edge of the box. I guess I was just interested in removing the top off the box because we threw a top on it so that we could backfill it and cover it, but in such a way that we don't fill the box with all these castings. So this would be the top that was placed onto it, I believe. I'm trying to remember the arrangement here. Alright, so we're starting to get down into where the feeding area is. Seems like the cardboard's kind of holding up. And then this must be, okay, I guess okay, now I remember. I threw a, besides the veggies and whatever was placed down low into the feeding area, I also threw an entire coffee filter full of coffee right on top too. So this right here is the actual coffee filter. And then I guess what's normally to be expected if you just pile in a big pile of something is that the worms might be able to get at some of the outer reaches of it, but if you have a big chunk of coffee like this, the inside of it's going to remain untouched for a long time. So I kind of expected that. Not a big deal. Just trying to remember what kind of foods had been placed in here. I'm not remembering offhand. It looks to me like maybe potato. I can't remember. It's hard for me to tell too sometimes just from looking at what something is after it's been in the worm bin for a while. So it's not really my aim to extract all the worms and evict them from the feeding area or the collection area. But if I do put more food in there, it's going to have to be frozen, because that's just the way I store all my worm foods. I don't have anything around for the worms that's not frozen. Although I actually do have a few things I might be able to throw in here just to keep this process moving along. I wouldn't want to see the food supply dwindle and then have the worms scatter. I do like the idea of having them all down here in the middle, so that at some point in the future we can try to get them together and relocate them. I'm not even too sure about this whole concept of the box, but holy cow, look at that. I must have just opened up a spot that was really, I don't know. The worms must really like it. Look how many tiny, tiny baby worms there are in here. It almost seems like baby worms are the majority. I wonder if when it was starting to get really, really cold and freezing temperatures were setting in, and it seemed like maybe these worms thought they weren't going to make it, perhaps they just laid a whole ton of cocoons in here, anticipating that they weren't going to make it and that they would just try to propagate onto the next generation. And now they've got all their offspring down in here too. So yeah, there's a good number of worms coming together here in the center. Kind of makes me wonder how many are still out and about throughout the material. So, you know, I'm not even sure about this whole concept of trying to treat this as a migration or as baiting. Maybe we should have just treated that last feeding as just another feeding. Because I'm inclined to give them more food, but not try to, you know, pigeonhole myself into needing to do it in a way that complies with the concept of trying to lure the worms for collection and relocation. Maybe we just return all this bedding stuff that's here, some of these scraps of food, and just grab them a little something more to throw in here to let them keep chowing down and possibly staying down here in the middle. And then maybe at some point in the future we can come in here better equipped to actually relocate them. Right now I don't really have a place to put them. I haven't set up a bin. I usually like to set up a new home for the worms and give it time, you know, so that it can sort of, I don't know, kind of prime, you know, kind of become nice and cozy for the worms before I move them in, rather than just moving them into a bunch of sterile, freshly shredded paper or something. So that's a pretty good collection of bedding right there that we could, and even more here, a whole bunch of it actually. We got a whole lot. So this will just be, and I'm going to keep it all together too, because I guess that was the whole concept too, was not to litter these nice castings with all kinds of tiny flakes of bedding. I wanted to use large chunks of bedding, a box, a coffee filter, all the pieces of bedding that I used to build this sort of baiting zone were larger chunks that I should be able to pull out pretty readily and not litter the castings with it. So this stuff will be good. This stuff, you know, they could keep nibbling on it as a kind of a carbon food source supplement. But as far as bedding goes, at least we'll be able to separate it pretty easily later. Alright, well, you can see there's a huge number of babies in this system, and once all those babies, you know, start to grow, this system's going to be jam-packed with tons of adult worms. And I think giving them some more food here is probably a really good idea. So, you know what, I'm going to head inside really quick, grab something from the freezer, and then hopefully all these scraps of paper have been more or less depopulated of worms, because then we could throw the frozen stuff kind of right on top of this and not worry about dropping cold stuff right on top of any unsuspecting worms that are right below it. So I'll excavate once or twice here really quick, and I'll excuse myself for just a moment so I can go get them some chow to throw in here, and then we'll be all set to go out here. So alright, let me take a quick break, go get them something to eat, and then we'll continue in a moment. So here's what they're getting. It's a pretty good assortment of all kinds of different fruits and veggies, all stuff that's been in my freezer and frozen, and as it thaws it's gonna get all mushy and gooey, and stuff that the worms should really enjoy eating. Yeah, but since it's frozen, we're gonna try to create a little bit of a enclosure for it with whatever is remaining down here as far as this bedding material is concerned. It's all it really is anymore, is just bedding type material. I think if there's any worms nearby, hopefully they can just squirm out of here and not be harmed by the cold. I don't know, I'm not too concerned about it. I usually try to be mindful of not doing it, you know, if it's possible to avoid it easily, but if I feel that if a worm does come in contact with something frozen, I don't know, it's just, I don't worry that much about it, that it's going to be injured or harmed. I got a feeling that it'll feel it, it'll squirm away, it'll split before any sort of problems can occur, I think. So I really don't think it's dangerous per se, but still it seems, you know, reasonable to avoid it if it seems easy enough to do so. So that's kind of my game plan usually when it comes to dealing with my frozen foods. Once in a while I'll thaw them out before feeding, but usually I don't bother. At best I'll usually just try to maybe shield them from the cold stuff before it gets dumped in. So yeah, after 12 days it seemed like I should check in here, even though I wasn't prepared to start hauling them out or relocating them or processing the material that they're inhabiting. But the material does look really nice, and it doesn't seem like the sort of stuff that you would want to sit around waiting for, because if you sit around waiting for the peanut shell to come to closure while all the rest of this other nice casting just sits here idle, it seems like a kind of a waste of time. So it does seem more sensible to start gearing up for getting these guys into a new home. And I guess that was my main reason for trying to kind of create the feeding in a sort of a focused small spot. You know, originally trying to contain it with the box, but then I guess I decided in the end that was just a little bit too much of a hassle, so I'm not going to bother with that. So yeah, I think things look really nice in here. I definitely like the way the castings are all crumbly and how they flow, and even though they're very loose and flaky, they're all quite damp, so there's really no dryness going on in this material whatsoever. It's all pretty much perfect. It means the worms can pretty much go anywhere they like in this stuff and be pretty comfortable in it. So that's pretty much where we stand with my outdoor worm bin. I didn't even take note of how many feedings this system's had or what age it is now on this day. I know it's well over 200 days at this point, so it's due, and it's a pretty good sized container, so there's a lot of castings in here too. Planting season's coming up. The garden has to be set up in another month and a half, 2 months or so. So at some point soon I will need the castings, but it's not urgent at this point yet, so letting this stuff go a little longer is certainly fine. They'll just keep adding to the collection of castings and making it all the better as far as I'm concerned. So let's get this thing covered back up. We can let these little guys continue as is. So that's pretty much it for our outdoor worm bag. Probably staying outdoors now anymore because it is, I think, just a couple days away from us entering spring here in my region, and today it certainly feels like it because it's in the mid 70s, and I'm not sure what that is in degrees Celsius, but it's warm and it's comfortable. So that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please, as always, don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go, and if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. And channel memberships are an option if anyone's interested in, you know, supporting the channel. That's always very much appreciated too. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye now.